no one needs the Jameis Winston that you stashed to try and immediately sell, the Dak Prescott that you stashed to try and immediately sell. No one needs them.
You're listening to Let's Talk Fantasy Football, where men of fantasy genius have realized, hey guys, we don't need real football skills to dominate on the fantasy field. Yeah. So slap on your pads and grab your helmet. Shit's about to get real.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of Let's Talk Fantasy Football. I'm your host tonight. My name is Nick Walsh, and I am here with no one. I am here by myself, but that's all right. What we are doing tonight is we are going to go through a little bit of draft strategy, along with a little bit of news and just kind of my thoughts on that, and then some guys that I'm targeting late round. Wanted to make sure we got some content out for you guys because I know there's a lot of drafts coming up. You might have questions about how to approach things or whatever the case may be. So I'm going to try and go through that in a pretty concise manner, I guess. But again, we'll see how it goes. Wow, my brain just went completely blank. I haven't even drank any beers yet. Anyway, like I said, guys, we're going to start with some draft strategy. I had my first big draft of the year this past week. So did a nice little road trip. The way down was nice and pleasant. The way back was less pleasant because I was egregiously hungover. But drove down, saw some friends, drafted a fantasy football team. I thought it went pretty well. So, it is what it is there. I pretty much did exactly what I wanted outside of really one round where I missed out on Latavius Murray by one pick, and then probably overdrafted Deshaun Jackson after that. But again, what can you do? And then again, guys, we will have, I believe, an additional podcast coming to you this week, hopefully as well. So let's get into this. My draft strategy for this year. I think in past years, if you've been a long time listener, I've advocated specific strategies in specific years. So maybe going running back heavy or zero running back or whatever the case may be. Maybe it's getting the top wide receivers. It's all kind of been based on that year, the results from the year before, those sorts of things. This year, I don't really think you need to force things like that. I don't think you need to force drafting running backs early. I think you can get away with drafting running backs late almost exclusively. I don't think you need to force drafting wide receivers early. I think you can kind of get away with that too. I think the biggest thing that I would say, and I'll get into some more specific advice afterwards, but the biggest thing that I would say for this year is to be aware of tiers of players. You want to know who is the last guy of this specific type of player that I am okay with getting here. If I need a running back, who is the last one that I can get, or can I wait, another couple picks, have it come back around to the next round and potentially be okay. And then be very aware of the characteristics of both players and offenses. And I'll give you guys some examples of that. So like some things that I think about in terms of this. So one of the big questions for me in early rounds is who's the last running back available who isn't likely to be eliminated from a game due to game script. So, if we're looking around the third round or so, again, I'm looking at fantasy football calculators, 12-team PPR, ADP, but if we're looking around that third round, you've got guys like Devontae Freeman, you've got Aaron Jones, Josh Jacobs, David Montgomery, and then you've got the next tier of sort of Chris Carson, Marlon Mack, Derrick Henry, Mark Ingram. So guys who I would say aren't going to be eliminated due to game script. I think I can say Josh Jacobs would fall into that tier. I think Devontae Freeman absolutely does. Does Chris Carson? I don't know. The Seahawks have said they want to get him some more pass work. Is he a little more game script dependent? Maybe. Marlon Mack, he's proven to be game script dependent in the past. Derrick Henry as well. Mark Ingram, I think, could be game script dependent despite being a pretty decent pass catching running back as well. So it's little things like that, I think, separating your players down into tiers of is this guy an every down back? Is this guy someone who can go off if the team is winning, but might, be eliminated if the team is behind? Rogers and I talked about it last week with Derrick Henry. I think he's a big one for me that despite all of his upside, I think I'm avoiding just because I don't necessarily want to deal with the early down back on a team that I'm not sure is going to be good. I mean, it's all about preference too. Maybe you're okay with a Derrick Henry or a Marlon Mack. Maybe you're okay with that variance that comes along with game script dependent running backs. For me, I'm really trying to avoid that, particularly at that stage, just because I think there are some guys who aren't as game script dependent who I can get, and then maybe some guys who are more game script dependent that I don't really need to touch at that price. So that's something to keep in mind. Another question that I find myself asking when I'm separating up guys I'm targeting and not targeting is which wide receivers are in offenses that want to throw the ball a lot. So for example, for some early round people, guys like Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, they are in Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay has Bruce Arians as a coach and Jameis Winston as a quarterback. Tampa Bay wants to throw the ball a lot. So those are both guys that I'm looking at targeting at their respective prices. And then maybe guys like Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs. Thielen came out so hot last year. Diggs was, had his points of being great, but this is a team that wants to run the ball first. We talked about it again last week. They fired John DeFilippo halfway through the year, despite the fact that the offense was doing pretty well, because they weren't running the ball enough, or he wasn't running the ball enough. So this is a team that wants to run the ball, and maybe that second half of the year, Adam Thielen is more who we have to look forward to this year. That more inconsistent Adam Thielen, that more inconsistent Stephon Diggs is who we have to look forward to this year. So guys like that, those are guys that maybe I'm not targeting at their ADP, guys who I think maybe the play calling tendencies of the team are not fully priced in. Kenny Golladay is another guy like that, who, the Lions want to run the ball a lot. Golladay is clearly going to be their number one target, but Marvin Jones is still there as well. They have other players who are going to be a factor here. So maybe that's a guy that I'm not looking to target as much. But again, the point that I'm trying to make with these examples is be aware of who you're drafting. Be aware of what team they play for, how that team wants to play, how that team wants to use them. Use everything to your advantage, whether it's past performance or preseason first team snaps, which I'll get into a little bit later, to try and suss that information out and have it ready for yourself by draft time. To get a little bit more specific here, I think, and I know we are a podcast that advocates the tight end roulette wheel, kind of if you don't get these elite guys, go ahead, spin that wheel, take your chances with guys in later rounds. For me this year, I am trying to have a tight end by the time Vance McDonald leaves the board. Now, he's currently tight end 8. I currently have him as my tight end 7. The discrepancy there is I have him ahead of Jared Cook. And again, if you are 12-team leagues, Vance McDonald is leaving the board by the middle of the 7th round. So I know tight end is generally a very inconsistent position. It's a position where you can get a couple elite guys, and then the mid-round guys have tended to underperform these past couple of years. I think part of that has been due to injuries. I think part of that has been due to the nature of the players that we've been drafting in the mid-rounds. I think the past couple of years, mid-round tight ends have largely been older players, Jimmy Graham, Greg Olsen, Delaney Walker, these guys who are maybe past their primes, they're not on the upswing of their careers, and we're trying to maybe capture production that they had in the past. Whereas this year, these mid-round tight ends that you're looking at, the O.J. Howards, the Evan Ingrams, the Hunter Henrys, the Vance McDonalds, and I guess you could throw Jared Cook in there as well. Not really for this example that I'm using, but these are guys on the upswing of their careers. These are guys who we expect to ascend into roles in either situations where it's going to be a pass-heavy offense or a situation where we really think they can soak up a lot of targets for an offense that's going to be that's going to need them to soak up those targets. So for me, I want one of those top 7 tight ends. I'm okay with not getting them, but man, that group behind it, the Eric Ebrons, David Njoku, Austin Hooper, I'm a little bit okay with, but TJ Hawkinson, Delaney Walker, Jordan Reed, Mark Andrews, these are all guys that I'm not as comfortable going into the year with. And if I draft any of them, I'm thinking that I'm probably either going to have to work the waiver wire this year, which is fine. We're used to working the waiver wire on tight ends. It can be a frustrating experience, but it's something that, I'm used to, that I will try and help you guys out with as much as possible this year. But I don't think it's preferred. I think there are 7 guys and maybe 8 with Jared Cook that you can look at and take off the board in those first 7 rounds and really say to yourself, I have my tight end for the year. I am confident that this person will see upwards of 90 targets, and I'm confident that they'll see enough red zone work that I should theoretically be able to just use them. The NFL is unpredictable. Injuries happen, all these sorts of things. But I am really looking to get one of those top 7 tight ends, I think, this year. And I'm not upset, but I'm a little disappointed if I don't. That being said, a position that I'm still not trying to get early is absolutely quarterback. I don't think it's worth it at all. There are a bunch of quarterbacks that you can get late round. In this draft that I had a couple of days ago, I ended up with Mitch Trubisky as my only quarterback. Totally fine with it, like 1% team league. And it's a league where people drafted too many quarterbacks. There are already people trying to shop quarterbacks in that league right after the draft, which is just a bad strategy. I think if I can impart any bit of knowledge with you, it's that do not overdraft quarterbacks to use as trade bait because it won't work, particularly early in the season. Everyone's fine at quarterback. In this draft that I did, Sam Darnold didn't get drafted. Derek Carr didn't get drafted. Josh Allen didn't get drafted. No one needs the Jameis Winston that you stashed to try and immediately sell, the Dak Prescott that you stashed to try and immediately sell. No one needs them. They all have their own quarterbacks that they're completely fine with. This year, I think the only way I'm touching an early quarterback is if the league that I'm in, they draft a couple rounds behind ADP. Pat Mahomes is going in the 3rd round. I'm not taking him before the 6th. Deshaun Watson is going in the 5th round. I'm not taking him before the 7th. There's just, I don't see the need to when you have guys like Lamar Jackson, Jameis Winston going off the board in the 10th round, and when you have Dak Prescott and Mitch Trubisky going off in the 13th and 12th rounds. It's just not necessary to me. And even if you don't get one of those guys that I just mentioned, I don't think you're going to get screwed at quarterback. I think no matter what happens, you're basically going to be able to find someone in somewhere between the 10th and 14th round that you will be okay with starting, or maybe a combination of guys that you're okay with starting. So again, keep that in mind. Tight end, yeah, go a little bit early. Quarterback, no, still no need to. And then just to throw in a little bit of advice on defense and kicker, I draft defense based on week 1 odds. So I'm looking at the week 1 matchups. I just got the Eagles defense. The reason I did that, 1, they should be a pretty good defense. 2, they're 9.5 point favorites week 1. The way that you get fantasy points from a defense is that defense gets ahead. They're able to get pressure on the quarterback and force turnovers. So I want a team that's going to be winning by a lot so they can tee off on that quarterback. They can get some pressure on there. They can force interceptions. They can maybe get some sacks. I want a team. That's how I draft. I stream defenses during the year. So, if you're looking to maybe, just draft a defense and set it and forget it, sure, I guess that's fine. That's not how I play. That's not how I've really ever played, because enough people do play like that the waiver wire for defenses generally ends up being fine. And you can do what I'm saying, where you can pick up guys based on the betting odds, based on the amount of pressure that they get on other teams' quarterbacks, and have a fairly successful season at defense. And then at kicker, again, last round, even if you still do play with a kicker, draft a kicker based on how good you think an offense is going to be. I know obviously there's Tucker and Gostkowski. I think those will be pretty good offenses as well. But again, in this league, I took Jake Elliott. He's the Eagles kicker. I took him because I think the Eagles offense is going to be good. Take kickers for the Chiefs. Take kickers for offenses that you think are going to maybe improve this year. The Panthers, the Niners, if you like them, the Browns. These teams that should be in their opponent's territory a lot. So again, keep that in mind. Don't take kickers that you think are good who are going to be playing on teams that you don't think are going to score that much. It doesn't make any sense to do that. All right, guys, I think that'll do it for the draft strategy portion of the podcast. Obviously, we'll get into some more detailed concepts here, but first I wanted to get into some recent news. So I think one of the biggest things, and this happened the night before the draft that I had, Josh Gordon's back, and the big question is just how high should you draft him? What I'll say right now is that if you're in on Josh Gordon, if you want to make sure you get him, you better be taking him in the 6th at the latest, because I don't think he's going to last much longer than that. Most leagues, I know his ADP currently is somewhere from the 6th to the 8th round, depending on the site that you're looking at, depending on the format. But to me, someone in each league is going to be higher on Josh Gordon than consensus. So if you're high on him, maybe even take him in the 5th. Personally, I'm not really going after him. I think he'll be good this year. I think it's fair to take him in the 6th round. I think based around the other talent here, I don't think that's a bad call. But I'm not actively looking at getting him because I think there are a lot of people out there who are. So again, just keep that in mind. The other thing to keep in mind with Josh Gordon is N'Keal Harry, who is being drafted in the 11th round currently. I don't think N'Keal Harry is really worth drafting. He, based on preseason reports, he hasn't done anything to separate himself from other outside receivers there like Maurice Harris and Jacoby Myers. Now that Josh Gordon is there and should theoretically take one of those outside receiver roles, I think N'Keal Harry can safely be left on the waiver wire unless we get any other news or any other sort of developments that really change the perception on him beforehand. Next news story here, Zeke Elliott and Melvin Gordon still holding out. We'll start with Zeke. He was offended at Jerry Jones' comments, the Zeke who comment. And honestly, I understand what he's talking about. I know Jerry Jones is like, oh, I'm master negotiator. I'm not worried. When have I not gotten a deal done? If I was Zeke, I would be like, fuck you, man. Stop being so cocky about this and take me seriously. I'm a serious thing, That's not really here nor there. Anyway, it doesn't really appear that the two sides are close at this point. And while Zeke still deserves to be a first-round draft pick just because of his upside in this, and again, he's not someone that I'm taking. I can't have my first-round draft pick potentially not be playing unless, I get fucked on an injury. To me, the floor is just very low there. I know it's a different situation than Lev Bell. I know that he needs to play in the regular season in order to accrue a year of free agency. I'm aware of all those things. Still, it just doesn't sit well with me. But I think the point here to be made is that Tony Pollard needs to be drafted, and I'm not opposed to taking him as high as the 9th round or so. If you look at other running backs going in that area, I think Tony Pollard has a lot of upside. He's shown to be very explosive in the preseason. Obviously take that with, but I mean, if you're looking at a guy like Jalen Samuels or LaShawn McCoy, Ronald Jones, Devin Singletary, is it worth taking any of those guys ahead of the guy who, in my mind, will likely be the week 1 starter for the Cowboys? I don't think he'll be the week 1 or the starter the entire year, but you can get a couple of extremely usable games with Pollard. And if you're scared that Zeke's going to come back, get 2 or 3 usable games out of him and try and flip him. To me, it's a no-brainer because he's immediately a 20 touch back, right off the bat of the season, unless Zeke comes back here. Distracted. The cat is trying to get underneath my door. I don't get why it's freaking out so bad. Not my cat. It's my roommate's cat. I think it just likes me for some reason. Anyway, it's really going nuts out there. All right. On the Melvin Gordon front, also still holding out. I think it's more likely that Gordon holds out longer. He's kind of dropped to the 3rd round. I think I'm okay with taking him in the 3rd round. Again, not sure that I'm actively looking to, but same situation as Zeke. He needs to play at some point in order to accrue a year of free agency. So holding out the whole year does not behoove him in the same way that it did Le'Veon Bell. That being said, 3rd round for a guy who could hold out 6 games, that's scary. And to me, Austin Eckler is just the guy who benefits here. I've said it before. He keeps creeping up draft boards. He's currently going 4th pick in the 6th round. I'm fine taking him a round earlier. Again, I think a lot of the running backs that you're taking at this point have some flaws based on situation or their own games. Whereas if I can take a guy who I'm pretty sure will be an elite producer for, the first several weeks of the season, like I can piece together running back as the season goes on the waiver wire. I'm okay with getting 4 weeks of production and potentially more from a guy like Eckler. And if Gordon does sign a deal, Eckler's a guy who at times last year had standalone flex value. He's really good. He can get you flex value on 12 touches a game. And that seems like around what I would guess he would have even if Gordon does come back. Sticking with the Chargers, the news with the Chargers is that they're kind of hurt, and this happens every year. But Derwin James, their stud free safety, he is out 3 to 4 months. That's going to hurt their defense. He was really great for them last year. Keenan Allen, hurt ankle. Russell Okung has an injury. He's their starting left tackle. I'm not saying that you should be downgrading Allen or really that you should be downgrading anyone on the Chargers, but keep it in mind. They're a team that I think perennially has very high expectations and then gets very injured. In some cases they're able to overcome those injuries, but keep an eye on this. It's something that seems to keep happening for them. They did sign Dontrell Inman as well for receiver depth after he was cut from the Patriots. Inman sort of made his name as a Charger, so they know who he is. And I think his signing, because both of them have primarily been slot receivers in their career, I think his signing is sort of a hedge on Keenan Allen's health. So if Keenan Allen is, his injury does linger, Dontrell Inman might be a starting receiver for the Chargers week 1. We'll see what happens with that completely. Let's move on to some guys who are sort of struggling more than we thought they would in the preseason. And the first one is Jimmy Garoppolo. He's been bad in preseason games, and supposedly he's been bad in practice as well. I haven't been watching that tape, so I wouldn't know. But I expected him to be very good this year. I bet on the Niners at 40 to 1 odds, but I bet on the Niners to win the Super Bowl because I think they have a good shot at exceeding those odds at least, or being better than those odds. Jimmy G being bad would be a huge issue for them. They do have guys who have played well. Nick Mullins was pretty good last year. I don't think this is anything to really rack your brain over too much, but it is a concern. I'm going to be paying attention very closely to the week 3 dress rehearsal for this team because I think you need to. If this is the third preseason game in a row where Jimmy Garoppolo is bad, we might have ourselves an issue. And maybe it won't translate. Maybe it'll be fine. But we'll see. It was worth noting, too, that after week 1, where a lot of wide receivers sort of moved in and out of their first team snaps in San Francisco, in week 2, Dante Pettis and Marquise Goodwin each played every snap that Jimmy G was in on. Jordan Matthews played 5 of those 11 snaps, coming in as the slot guy. So, maybe we need to slow the hype a little bit on Deebo Samuel and Jalen Hurd, who are getting a lot of love after being featured in week 1 and looking good in week 1 of the preseason. But again, week 3, this third preseason game is huge for our take on this Niners offense and huge for sort of our read on their expectations of who's going to play going forward. The other person and team, I guess, who's really struggling more, who a lot of people are high on, have been Kyler Murray and the Cardinals. The Cardinals offense has looked bad, and it hasn't just been sort of dumb penalties and that sort of thing that have happened. Kyler hasn't been accurate. He's been overthrowing guys on what seem like throws that an NFL quarterback should make. And it's entirely possible this is just jitters. It's entirely possible the false start calls on him have been just throwing him off and, completely getting him off his game. I can't really say anything for sure, but Kyler has not looked good to this point. I think it's up to you to decide, is that a reason for decreasing his draft stock and maybe some other Cardinals draft stock, or are we hoping that it does decrease the draft stock so we can take advantage of it and get Kyler and the featured Cardinals at a lower price? I haven't really decided yet. I think this is another one. The third preseason game matters a lot here because so far our expectations have not been met. With their wide receivers as well, it's been a bit confusing. They've rotated in heavily despite Fitzgerald, Christian Kirk, and Kevin White, believe it or not, being at the top of the depth chart. Kirk has also been playing heavily in the slot when he's been in, which has been, about half snaps with Kyler, which is worrisome as well because you would think Fitz is going to be a slot guy. So if they're going to split time and neither of them is going to be a full-time receiver, that's bad for us because those are the two guys we're drafting at the highest. Christian Kirk did play outside last year. I have faith that they'll keep putting him outside and that he will be a full-time receiver. But again, third preseason game, it matters a lot here. Let's move to a couple of guys whose arrows are sort of pointing up based on preseason performances. Give me one moment to take a sip of my beer. Manny Sanders. I said all offseason I am not touching Manny Sanders with a 39.5-foot pole. I think that's what it says in the Grinch song. I'm not touching him because he's a 32-year-old coming off an Achilles tear that happened in December. Achilles tears are very, very serious injuries that have kept guys out for a long time. They've ruined careers. Manny Sanders appears to be completely healthy based on his performance in the Monday night preseason game this past week. Maybe it's a smokescreen, but he looked good cutting. They gave him a designed run. They gave him a jet sweep. He looked good cutting upfield. He looked explosive. I still don't know how high I'm really targeting him. He's going the 12th pick in the 9th round just because Joe Flacco's his quarterback. I know Joe Flacco supported John Brown as a fantasy wide receiver last year, but I'm not sure the two of them have the same skill set. I'm not sure how the offenses are really going to work, whether they will be similar or different. The Ravens were a very pass-heavy team up until Joe Flacco was benched, at which point they became extremely run-heavy, whereas I think the Broncos are going to be pass-heavy the whole time. So there's a lot of moving parts here. I'm not actively going off after Manny Sanders by any means. I don't think I'll end up with him in many drafts, but I'm not as staunchly opposed to taking him, which before I wouldn't have taken him in the 18th round of a draft. I think after this apparent show of health, I'm more open to taking him in later rounds, not where he's just going just yet. The other guy who I think his arrow is pointing up here based on preseason indication is Marlon Mack. And that's because Marlon Mack, with the Colts first team, got 18 of the snaps, and only one of those snaps went to Nyheim Hines. So the concern, I said it before, is that Marlon Mack was a guy last year who was not in on passing downs. They didn't really use him in the pass game. Some smart people have said they think he can be used in the pass game, but the Colts didn't use him like that last year. So I think the expectation was that Nyheim Hines would be in if the team got down and Marlon Mack would be in if the team was ahead. It's early in the game. They obviously aren't in those sets where they're down 14 in 19 snaps and needing to use Nyheim Hines. So who knows if it's a total indication, but Mack being in for almost every snap gives me a little bit more confidence that if maybe some of the other guys that I like there that I mentioned earlier in the podcast who I think are going to be every down backs, maybe if some of those guys get taken off the board before I'm able to get a stab at them, maybe Marlon Mack is a guy that I'll be considering a little bit more than I was before. All right, guys, that's going to do it for the news and sort of the movers here. To close out, I just wanted to go through a couple of players that I'm targeting in the mid to late rounds and sort of why I'm targeting them, and then I'll let you guys get out of here. I'm sure you've had enough of hearing me talk. So the first one that I wanted to bring up, and this is definitely mid-rounds, is Latavius Murray. He's the first pick in the 7th round. That's running back 32. It's been clear based on the preseason's snap splits for the first team for the Saints that the Saints are not just handing this role to Alvin Kamara. They're going to keep using Kamara like they did last year as the primary back, but as the 15 to 18 touchback. And Latavius Murray will be used in the 12 to 15 touchback sort of role, the Mark Ingram type of role. Now, last year, Mark Ingram was suspended 4 games, and I'm pretty sure he was still going in the 5th round. So if they've got the same role, Latavius and Ingram, and you're getting the first 4 games out of him, first pick in the 7th round seems like a bargain. He was the one where I said earlier I missed him by a pick in that draft. And, I sort of panicked and I ended up taking Deshaun Jackson, I think. I wasn't terribly happy with that, but what can you do? Latavius, though, is a guy I'm really looking at as, someone who, particularly if I miss on some of the early round running backs, maybe I go wide receiver heavy. Maybe I have to get George Kittle in the 3rd round. Maybe I have to take OJ Howard in the 5th, whatever the case may be there. If I don't have enough running backs heading towards the back half of, the single digit draft rounds, Latavius, I think, is a great pick at the top of that 7th round. I'll even take him late in the 6th round, that sort of thing. The next guy is the guy that I took on the first part of my swing in order to miss Latavius. The reason I didn't get Latavius was because I wanted to target Curtis Samuel. Now, he's currently going the 6th pick in the 7th round. That's wide receiver 33. I am very, very bullish on the Panthers offense. They're another team. I just bet them at 50-1 to win the Super Bowl. Not expecting that, but I think they're really going to be an ascendant offense this year. Cam Newton appears to be fully healthy. Christian McCaffrey, we know, is a stud. They upgraded their offensive line, and then they've got 2nd-year receiver DJ Moore and 3rd-year receiver Curtis Samuel really coming into their own. Curtis Samuel in particular has been the star of training camp by all reports. So to me, 7th round equity for him, I'll take it all day. He's the guy that they're saying is going to be running sort of those more intermediate to deep routes within this offense, whereas DJ Moore will be closer to the line of scrimmage as well as McCaffrey. And Cam's arm has supposedly looked great in preseason. Again, I know this is all coach speak. I know none of this is for sure, but I'm trying to get ahead on this ascendant offense. Now, the other thing is that Samuel's price has really increased over the past couple of weeks. Just a week or two ago, you were able to get him in the 9th round. Now he's up to the 7th due to all this hype. I still don't think it's an overpay. I still think he's a guy that I'm willing to overdraft a little bit just because I think his upside is so high, and the Panthers offense in general just has very high upside. I'm trying to latch on to offenses that I think can be prolific, and the Panthers, I think, is one of them this year. Moving a little later in the draft, Matt Breida is a guy that I'm taking. He's currently 8th pick in the 10th round. That's running back 46. That's still his ADP on Fantasy Football Calculator. The past couple of drafts that I've been doing on the draft app, as well as the one that I did live the other day, he went earlier. So you might have to reach him to the 8th or 9th round to get Matt Breida. But at this point, based on the starter snaps, he's been basically splitting the load with Tevin Coleman. And Tevin Coleman is going at least 3 rounds ahead of him. So to me, it's a no-brainer. Matt Breida is a guy who's only shown to be productive when he's been on the field in his NFL career. He's a guy that's shown that he can play through injuries and still be productive. I'm really all about it. I think he's a slam dunk of a pick at that point. And that's at a point where you really can't get too many guys that are in as much of a guaranteed role as Breida. No one else in that range is going to be getting 40% of the snaps week 1 for their team, outside of, LaShawn McCoy or that kind of thing, which, again, I don't think the Bills' offense is going to be as good, nor do I think McCoy at this stage in his career is as good as Breida. So Breida's a guy, and, I expressed my concerns about Jimmy G before. Breida's a guy that I'm still actively targeting in my drafts. Another running back, Alexander Madison of the Vikings, currently going 11th pick in the 11th round. That's running back 51. Now Madison played basically all the snaps with the starters because Dalvin Cook did not play the second preseason game. He had a nice 22-yard run. He appears to be the favorite to be their backup. There's been talks about CJ Ham, the fullback, maybe getting some work as a 3rd down back. I'm not sure how much I buy that. But Dalvin Cook has been injury riddled in his career so far. Is it possible that he plays a full season? Yeah, absolutely. But as if you can get a handcuff to someone who has an injury history, I don't think that's the worst thing to do at the back end of the 11th round or the early 12th round. He's a guy with a lot of upside and clearly a guy that the Vikings like. So I like him as well in what, should be a run first offense. I talked about it earlier. The next guy is Tony Pollard, who was mentioned earlier as well. Currently 9th pick in the 12th round, running back 59. I want him everywhere. I think even if you draft him and then as the season gets closer, the Zeke owner in your league is going to get more and more nervous. So there's a chance that you can draft him in the 12th round and then before the season even starts, trade him for an 8th or 7th rounder. Like that to me is fine strategy as well. Or you can just use him if Zeke does not get back with the team as quickly as some of us may hope. And then we'll close out with 3 wide receivers here. Jamison Crowder, to me, first pick in the 12th round, wide receiver 55. Sam Darnold has looked great this preseason. He has looked very, very good. That continues a trend that towards the end of last year, he also looked great. Sam Darnold has also shown last year that he has a tendency to target the slot. We liked Quincy Enunwa early in the year because he was getting like 10 targets a game being in the slot. I think Crowder is a better slot receiver than Quincy Enunwa. I think he has more of a chance of really racking up those targets and really doing more after the catch with the targets than Enunwa did, who Enunwa was a very high floor and low ceiling type guy. Even after Enunwa got hurt, Darnold showed a tendency to target Jermaine Kearse, who was absolutely terrible. There was one game where he had like 10 targets and 1 catch. I played him in daily fantasy that week. It fucking sucked. But if you've got a guy more talented like Jamison Crowder in the slot, to me that works. So with him clearly being the full-time slot guy for Sam Darnold and also Chris Herndon being out the first 4 weeks, that would seem to be a boon for the over-the-middle type targets. I really like Crowder at that draft position. I think he's a great pick. Michael Gallup, the second wide receiver for the Cowboys. He's currently the 3rd pick in the 13th round. It's wide receiver 57. To me, this is a guy who, really sort of got it together towards the end of the year and supposedly has had a great offseason. I think what you're doing here is sort of hedging that the Cowboys offense will be pretty good and getting an ancillary piece at a very cheap price. So I do think the Cowboys offense will be very good. And I do think their passing game will be able to support more than one primary pass catcher. Right now, really, Amari, outside of, Zeke and Pollard's targets, is the only guy getting drafted as a substantial Cowboys pass catcher. Jason Witten is, the tight end, and he's not getting drafted. So to me, Gallup stands to reason as someone who just, if the offense is going to be good, there'll be more than just targets for Amari. Therefore, I want Gallup. And the last guy I'm going to talk about is John Brown at the 7th pick in the 13th round. That's wide receiver 59. John Brown has been on the field almost every snap with Josh Allen in the preseason, and here's why that's important. Because Josh Allen at the end of last year was able to make Robert Foster a viable deep threat. He was able to make him a viable fantasy asset. I think John Brown's better than Robert Foster. Robert Foster this year, who knows if the coaches are making the right decision, but Robert Foster has seen basically 0 first-team snaps after being very productive towards the end of last year. So they clearly think that John Brown is someone who can excel in that role that Foster played at the end of last year greater than Foster did. We've seen John Brown be productive with both the Cardinals and with the Ravens before they moved to Lamar Jackson and stopped chucking the ball down the field last year. So if the Bills are going to chuck the ball down the field a little bit and John Brown's going to be on the field for, virtually every snap, to me, he's a guy who's got to be owned, and he's a guy who's a screaming bargain in the middle of the 13th round. All right, guys, that's going to do it for all that I have to say today. Hopefully you guys got some good information out of this. If you didn't, I'm sorry for making you listen to me for 40 minutes. I'm sorry I had a brain fart in the very beginning of the podcast and couldn't remember what to say for several seconds. Hopefully I made up for it with the rest of it. That being said, make sure you are keeping an eye out for the rest of our content that we have coming, because we will still have content coming. Hopefully we will have something else later this week for you guys. And if not, we will absolutely have all the news that you need to know from week 3 of the preseason, which, as we all know, is the most important week to look at those first-team offense trends. So until then, if you haven't seen or listened to the division previews, which are all out, make sure you are checking those out. Those still have good information, even if they are a couple weeks old, some of them at this point. Make sure you're checking those out. Make sure you keep an eye out for the rest of our content coming out. For Let's Talk Fantasy Football, I am your good pal, Nick Walsh. Later, podcast.
This has been Let's Talk Fantasy Football. Thanks for listening.